Perfect. Let's begin. Right, hi everyone. My name's Sam, and I'm just going to take you on a very quick tour around my dissertation, which was on paradoxical performance effects, which is just a fancy word for choking or bottling, and its relationship between perfectionism, perfectionistic rumination, and choking. I'm actually really glad, Will, that you talked about the McElroy example, because that was the main example I used in my thing. So we might be able to explore some of the possible reasons behind that performance. Just a quick touch on perfectionism, just to begin with. Andy spoke about it at the beginning, and it just is a multi-dimensional characteristic that involves striving for flawlessness and the setting of exceedingly high standards. We used Hewitt and Flett's multi-dimensional model in this study, which describes three components of perfectionism, where you've got the self-oriented, other-oriented, and socially prescribed perfectionism. In a sporting context, there are loads and loads of athletes that identify as perfectionistic. These are just a couple of examples. On the plus side, it tends to be associated with better leadership, time management, a motivational affect, and tenacity. But on the negative side, you also have difficulty concentrating, experience higher perceived coach and parent pressure, and more anxiety and athlete burnout. In terms of perfectionistic rumination, perfectionism is actually associated with quicker and more frequent onset of rumination, which just means not being able to graduate from your mistakes and going over and over them in your head, which is associated with stress, negative affect, and a lack of self-control. Few studies have actually looked at perfectionistic rumination as an antecedent to negative performance, so that's what we were really trying to do. And then choking in sport, paradoxical performance effects, refers to the significant breakdown of skilled performance under pressure, mainly caused by distraction of focus or a monitoring of schema previously run automatically. And this is best exemplified in the self-presentation model of choking, the one that I was using. And so distraction there, distraction from goals, and self-focus when you look within yourself and start overthinking things which are normally done automatically. Couple that with higher anxiety and you have an increased likelihood of choking. So in the study, we knew that perfectionism was linked with a high level of anxiety and also perfectionistic rumination. What was unclear is what role rumination actually plays in choking. This is important because as teams get better and better physically, more of the difference comes down to the mental fortitude of athletes, individuals, and teams. And so the aims of the study were to look a bit at the relationship between perfectionism, rumination, and choking, and to see whether perfectionistic rumination could predict choking beyond trait perfectionism alone. And so picking a choking study in a global pandemic wasn't the best idea. So I had to do an online questionnaire rather than an actual choke. So I had to ask them about a memory of a choke, which was a bit difficult, and ended up in quite a long questionnaire with several lengthy scales, but they were all the abbreviated versions to make it as short as possible. What I found was a very strong link between all three variables. Perfectionism was linked to choking through correlations with higher sports anxiety, and also lower coping with adversity. Perfectionistic rumination was able to explain a lot less freedom from worry, a lot more self-consciousness, and a lot lower coachability. So from this, we can find that perfectionistic rumination was actually able to predict some aspects of choking. So you couldn't predict choking altogether, but there were a few predictors there that allow us to make inferences about perhaps potential chokers. And this is really important because if we have perfectionistic rumination, it gives us a concrete manifestation of perfectionism, which can be treated rather than trying to alter an athlete's personality as a whole, which is quite difficult to do. It also gives you something that coaches can spot faster. So if you can see an athlete struggling to get over making a mistake, that's a nice highlighter of potentially more perfectionistic athletes and a higher risk of choking. And if teams and individuals are choking less, they are more likely to be successful, therefore happier and healthier. Thank you for listening. I welcome any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. Another fantastic presentation with lots of interesting information in there. Is there any questions from the floor or anything like that, or anything that anybody wants to add or comment on? Okay, I think your presentation was fantastic, and you kind of answered the key question I wanted to ask right at the end. I was wondering, is there any sort of behaviours that coaches can look out for in terms of, I know rumination is obviously to do with thoughts, but is there anything behaviour-wise that coaches could look out for to give them signs of perfectionism and potentially leading to a choke situation in that athlete?
Yeah, it's quite difficult, perfectionism without doing an actual personality test to determine who might be slightly higher along the spectrum than others. The rumination is one of the more concrete ones, and just attitudes. There's perhaps more self-recrimination and stuff like that, are things that perhaps indicate a higher level of concern over mistakes and the higher personal standards. And I think once you get to know your athletes, you get to know the goals that they set for themselves, and what happens when they don't actually reach those goals, I think is very telling.
Brilliant. And if I can, I'll ask a follow-up as well. Is there anything that you would recommend? So say we've got a coach and they feel they have a perfectionistic athlete who's going into quite an anxiety-causing situation. So maybe it's a really important competition. Is there anything that you would recommend to that coach that they could potentially say or do to sort of check in with that athlete?
It's quite difficult. It's quite difficult to change overnight, I think, before a competition. What I would recommend is earlier in the lead up and things like that, when you're practicing in training. Andy mentioned it as well, is getting them used to failing and being able to not reach their goals and not meet expectations, and realize that that's part of sport, that's part of life. It's not something that's live or die. And I know a lot of people will have their own personal standards to live up to, but if as a coach you can maybe reduce the amount of pressure that you're putting on athletes, then their other-oriented perfectionism, if they are high in other-oriented perfectionism, then that maybe takes one less thing out that they have to think about. If they think, oh, I'm perhaps letting myself down, they don't have to worry about letting the coach down or letting their parents down or anything as well. So just try and take that pressure from the coach off the athlete.